wherever you're joining us from. My name is Claudia Arand, and we welcome you to Shaping the Future of Food, a webinar hosted by the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. We're looking forward today to telling you a little bit of our inside story behind our Agroecology Uprooted podcast. But as we're waiting for other people to join us, we'll invite you to maybe introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, and maybe what the weather is like where you are, because we were just talking about it, how here in Minneapolis, the weather can't seem to make up its mind. It was 90 degrees last week. It's 50 degrees again today. So we're hoping that spring and summer is going to be here soon and here to stay. So again, welcome to Shaping the Future of Food. We're going to give it a few minutes to let people join. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Claudia Arand, and we're excited that you're here today for our second session of 2026 for Shaping the Future of Food. Today, we will feature a special spotlight on our current podcast, Agroecology Uprooted. Our guests today are Lilly Richard, who is the Digital Communications Manager at IATP, and Ernesto Mendez, who's a professor of Agroecology and Environmental Studies and a co-director at the Institute for Agroecology at the University of Vermont. Before we introduce our guests and get started, here's a little bit of housekeeping. Lauren, can you? Thank you. So please go ahead and use Q&A for your questions. We will take some time at the end to respond to your questions. If you have any comments, please use the chat, and closed captioning is available. There should be a CC button at the bottom of your screen. If not, click on the More button and you should be able to enable that closed captioning feature. So at the end, we will have some time to answer some questions. Just to get started, who is IATP? If you're new to IATP, if you're new to us, and this is our first webinar, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy is a nonprofit research and policy organization, and we're dedicated to the realization of just and resilient food and farm systems. We work at the intersection of food systems, climate change, and international trade. And just about 2 years ago, we launched this monthly virtual program called Shaping the Future of Food, where we provide an overview of IATP, who we are, and what we do. And today, we will highlight the latest in our series of podcasts called Uprooted that are produced and hosted by Lilly Richard. This is actually our fourth Uprooted podcast in the series. Prior podcasts focused on COP27 in 2022, followed by the Farm Bill and how to fight a factory farm in the fall of 2024. And we will provide a link to all of our podcasts in the follow-up email that you're going to receive from us. In this newest series, Agroecology Uprooted, launched just a few weeks ago, and today you will get an exclusive behind-the-scenes look along with some comments from our special guest. And here's an introduction to the podcast.
We've got our tech support about to play a video.
Yes.
There's a lot about our current agricultural system that's not working. It's not working for producers, it's not working for consumers, and it's not working for the environment.
Over 40% of insect species are threatened with extinction over the next several decades, which is kind of terrifying.
And this food system is really stressing our nitrogen cycles, the levels of acidity in the ocean. It's a big cause of climate change. And yet, we need food systems to survive. Food systems are also having to work harder and harder because they face water scarcity and disruptive weather patterns and loss of biodiversity.
And the farming community is so stressed. They're shouldering all of the risk for these corporations. We're literally killing our farmers for corporate greed.
The food system is broken. Everyone is saying that. Whether you're the head of Nestle's or the head of FAO or the head of an NGO, we're all saying the food system is broken. Point is that the guys who broke it aren't the ones that can fix it.
What does it mean for the food system to be in crisis? And how do we get out of it? There's no simple answer, but sometimes complicated systemic problems don't call for simple answers. They call for solutions that honor their complexity. All around the globe, there are people already putting this type of solution into practice, with an approach to food and agriculture that keeps people, the planet, and justice at the center. It's called agroecology, and I've spent the past several months talking to farmers, researchers, and other experts about what it is and how it might offer an answer to one of the biggest challenges of our time: how to feed the planet without destroying the planet.
Well, what do we need to have a good food system in a time of climate change and biodiversity loss? And the answer to that is, well, we need to have a highly diverse food system that lets us adjust quickly to different conditions.
And the really amazing thing about this is that what is healthy for individual people is healthy for our planet.
We're redesigning to cultivate these diverse foods to feed both our home, our family, our neighbors, our community.
Agroecology is farming using nature. It is combining indigenous knowledge plus modern science. We share knowledge, and that is agroecology.
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 Coming soon from the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, a new limited podcast series, Agroecology Uprooted.
Well, this was just a brief introduction to our newest podcast, Agroecology Uprooted, and it is my pleasure now to introduce the producer, creator, and host of the podcast, Lilly Richard.
Thank you, Claudia. I'm Lilly Richard. I'm the Digital Communications Manager at IATP. So I do a lot of different things. I manage our social media. I do our website, graphic design, some copy editing and communication strategy. And I also have hosted the podcast for the last 4 years. So when I first started at IATP in 2022, we were doing some communications planning with Sophia Murphy, our executive director, and Ben Lilliston, my supervisor. And they wanted to bring back the IATP podcast Uprooted, which had been dormant for a few years. And so they asked me, like, do you have any experience making podcasts? Can you do this? And I said, no, I don't, but I can figure it out. So the first series was about COP27, which is the Conference of Parties, the UN International Climate Conference that happens every year. And it was sort of focusing on civil society's role in that and how people are trying to draw connections between food systems and agriculture and climate change, and also trying to push for agroecology as a solution to a lot of the ways that food systems are causing and are threatened by climate change. And then the next year we did a series on the Farm Bill, which was supposed to have passed in 2023, but it still hasn't passed 3 years later, so that series is still relevant. And then we did a series with the Campaign for Family Farms and the Environment, which is a coalition that IATP is part of, which is dedicated to fighting factory farms, especially in the Midwest. And IATP's role in that is really looking at how there are a lot of federal and state policies that support and incentivize factory farms. And then we're connected with a bunch of other regional organizations that are actively fighting factory farm expansion in their own communities. And then last year, we were thinking about doing a new series. And the first idea was to focus on the farm crisis of the 1980s, which is actually how IATP was founded. And so I interviewed our founder, Mark Ritchie, for that. But as I was doing research on the farm crisis, it started to get a little bit too depressing because a lot of the policies and root causes of the 1980s farm crisis were never fixed. And we're in another farm crisis now. And with everything else that is going on in the world, it started to get a little bit too dark for me. And it was hard to sort of figure out a way to shape that series in a way that wouldn't be just sad and depressing. So I wanted to shift gears and focus on agroecology as something that could potentially be a little bit more hopeful, because there are people, already practicing agroecology around the world and sort of showing what is possible. And it's, there's a lot of potential in that system. And it's also something that is unfamiliar, I think, to a lot of people, especially in the US. It's something that IATP works on a lot and that a lot of our partners work on, but it's sort of a complicated topic. It goes beyond just sustainable agriculture, and it contains all of these different principles. It's connected to food sovereignty. So it seemed like a potential topic to create something very educational for people and hopefully interesting and hopeful as well, and sort of optimistic. It's still pretty dark because our current system is, killing us and killing the planet. But agroecology is something that offers sort of a way forward potentially. So I started working on that, researching it, talking to people about it, and it's a huge topic, and it's something that I think it can also be sort of sensitive because it's a political topic as well. And I'm trying to speak to a lot of different audiences with this series. And so I want to reach people maybe in the US who are unfamiliar with agroecology or are skeptical of it and think that it seems like, hippie nonsense. But I also want to reach people who are in the global south and who are actively working on agroecology and food sovereignty. And I want to handle those issues sensitively and give them the respect that they deserve. And then there are also all of these other pieces that go into it. There are things that it's too much for me to cover within this series. So it's more of an introduction to agroecology. It doesn't get into all of the issues that people are actively working on in organizations and movements and universities around the world. But hopefully it's an adequate introduction to the topic. So we have 5 episodes of the series. 3 have already been released. And if you haven't listened to those yet, please listen to them and share them with your friends. And then we have 2 left to come. One is coming out next week, and then 1 2 weeks after that. And both of those are going to feature our guest, Ernesto Mendez. But the final 2 episodes start to get more into food sovereignty and how do we actually change systems, because agroecology aspires to be more than just sustainable on-farm practices. It's about redesigning the entire food system from the ground up. It's not a top-down sort of thing, which makes it difficult and tricky, but that's also the beauty of it. I mean, there's so much possibility there. So we can only do 5 episodes, and I think there's so much more ground that I wish we could have covered. There's so many more experts that I wish I could have talked to, but we're sort of limited by my own capacity because I do almost everything to make this podcast. The scripts are reviewed and edited by my comms colleague Lauren, and also my supervisor Ben, and also my colleague Shiny Varghese, who leads a lot of our agroecology work and has years and years of experience with agroecology and is connected to so many other people within the movement. So they do review the scripts and edit them and make sure that they're accurate. But I do almost all of the pieces of the podcast production. So if you look at like a podcast that's produced by NPR or like even Radiolab or something like that, you'll probably see a list of names of all the people who worked on it, who did the research and the pre-production and the production and the writing and the editing and the audio mixing and the hosting. And for this podcast, I do all of those jobs. So I reach out to people, mostly it's people who have been connected with IATP and we've worked with before, but I conduct the interviews, I write the questions, I review the transcripts and find the pieces of information that I want to pull into podcast scripts. I organize them by themes. I write the script and the narration that connects those pieces together. And then I do the audio editing where I'm cutting apart different pieces of different interviews and putting them together and trying to make the sound mix sound correct. And I'm doing a lot of things like cutting out all of the ums and as many of the breath sounds as I can. And sometimes I'm cutting and pasting different pieces of sentences together, not to misrepresent what people say, but to turn, sometimes when we speak, we don't speak in complete thoughts. And so I'm trying to make everyone sound as coherent as possible and make sure that their thoughts fit into a clear explanation of what they're talking about and what sort of the narrative arc of the episode is. And then I'm also doing the graphic design and the promotion and the distribution for the most part. So it's a lot, and it's sort of taken over my life for the past few months, and I'm excited for it to be done, even though I wish that there's more that we could do with this series. But it's also, I feel like it's not perfect. I wish it could be perfect, but it's 100% human made, and I'm the human that made it. But the process, it's been a lot, but it's also been fun. I mean, it's a consequence of being sort of a resource limited small nonprofit that this is how it gets made, but it also has given me more creative control and me the ability to talk to so many people and have a hand in every piece of this process. And I've just had really incredible conversations with really amazing, intelligent people who are doing amazing things. I'm thinking about like my conversation with Sam at the Grow By Intensive Center. Wait, Grow By. I know Kennedy is in the audience here at GBAC, the Grow By Intensive Center of Kenya. So hopefully I got that right. But they're doing really incredible things there, just in a small 2-acre piece of land. Thank you. Growing an abundance of food and being really deliberate with, growing calorie crops to make sure that people are fed well enough, and growing like highly nutritious crops, growing carbon crops, which have a lot of, more leaves than fruit, so they can really use them for composting, and they're incorporating animals and flies and fly larvae into their process and creating this whole, self-sustaining ecosystem that's also growing so much food for people and at the same time educating people, sharing knowledge, and empowering people, empowering young people especially who come and get trained at the center, which I feel like it's an incredible example of what's possible through agroecology. And one of the things that I also feel like is sticking out to me through my work on the series is how much the industrial agricultural system disempowers us and sort of takes away the imagination of what the food system could be and could look like and what's possible. And so agroecology is a really inspiring alternative to that. But at the same time, it's holding so many things. It's holding so many sort of challenges and difficulties because it's not just about small projects like that. And it's not just about what's possible on the farm. It's about how do we get a bigger transition, and how do we create these systems that make that possible? And that's something that has to come from a lot of different angles. And obviously what IATP works on is sort of the policy level, and especially looking at what policies are making broader transition impossible? How are trade policies blocking countries and communities from achieving food sovereignty because there are rules that countries have to follow in order to trade, and sometimes that's taking away from more sustainable practices that are happening within countries. But what are the possibilities for policy to support agroecology and to support that transition? Because it's not a quick transition either. It's something that is going to take a lot of time and a lot of intervention. And it's not something that's sort of a fantasy that we can snap our fingers and create a better food system instantly. But there are a lot of things that are already happening and sort of showing the way of what a transition looks like and what could be possible. I also am thinking about a quote from John Lundgren that was in the most recent episode of just the feeling of being on a biodiverse, agroecological, regenerative farm and how uplifting it can be to be part of a healthy ecosystem, and that's something that we can play a role in facilitating and creating. And so it's been an amazing process. I am a little bit ready for it to be over. I'm working very hard on the 4th episode right now, featuring some quotes from Ernesto. And Ernesto was also one of the first people that I spoke to about creating the series. Before I even interviewed him, he was in town with Colin Anderson, who's a co-director at the Institute for Agroecology. And we just sort of talked about the idea of creating a series to try to inform people about agroecology and how it's important to try to hold all of these different pieces and to not misrepresent it, but to also sort of show what's possible and what's out there, and that it's not just a niche thing. It's something that is connected to all these movements and could be, more broadly implemented. And that educating people about it can play a role in helping that transition happen. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Ernesto. Let me see, I'll pull up the bio, but I can't read the whole thing. It's too long. He's very impressive, just like, everyone that I spoke to for the podcast. But Ernesto Mendez is a professor of agroecology at the University of Vermont, where he also serves as faculty co-director of the Institute for Agroecology. He has over 30 years of experience working with smallholder and indigenous farmers in Latin America and collaborating in agroecology efforts around the world. Since 2022, he serves as vice president of the board of directors of the Latin American Scientific Society for Agroecology, or SOCLA. And there's a lot more, but I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ernesto so he has time to speak. So welcome.
Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here, Lily. And tell me where you want me to start, because we have several things we've talked about. But maybe the first thing that I will say is how important I think your podcast and these webinars are. I was reading the chat, and some people are mentioning that they are familiar with agroecology and that they feel that agroecology is not that absent in the US. I would say that my experience in these 30 years, and at least 25 of those in the United States actively, is that it really isn't deep enough or broad enough within this country. When you look, for example, at Europe, where you have these multi-country initiatives that are doing agroecology exchanges, they're doing living labs, they're getting support from the European Union, from all the funders that are, very strong. There's a lot of investment. I would say that it's quite the opposite here in the US. There's actually been people that have analyzed how much money the USDA gives to agroecology. Years ago, it was less than 1%. I would imagine that right now is even less than that. So, from government, in academia, we have a handful of agroecology programs training people and doing research. So I think there's a long way to go. And without getting caught up in, agroecology is the best or anything like that. I do think it's good to have a common approach, especially when we start thinking about influencing policy, because that is one of the things that happens is if I'm calling it agroecology and somebody else regenerative agriculture and somebody else organic, it's really easy for people who are against anything that's sustainable agriculture to just say, oh, you guys don't even have it together. So I do think there's some value in adopting some common language that we can use in order to advocate for these approaches. Do you want me to do my slides? Okay. Let me share then. So I wanted to share with you a little bit of what the Institute for Agroecology is. Can you see that? Yeah, so the Institute for Agroecology is 3 years old, 3.5, I would say maybe. We started as a community of practice here at the University of Vermont. And just to say that it was really hard, it took 12 years at least to really convince the administrators that investing in agroecology was a good thing to do. And we were able to do that, but it was a lot of work. And I think I perceive it as part of the issue that we have. The people don't know the approach in the field as much as they could. So again, doing podcasts and communications that can reach a really broad audience are super important right now as we are trying to transform our food systems. There's some urgency around it. First thing that I want to say is what I understand by agroecology. I do see it as an approach that uses or applies ecological, social, and political principles to design, manage healthy, equitable, and resilient food systems. And there's a lot in there, and that is very intentional. Because what has been my experience in the past by working, for example, with organic farming or ecological farming, is that when you leave the social and the political out, it's really hard to reach deep transformation, which is the transformation that we're aspiring for. So in the Institute, when we started, we really wanted to have a basis, some guiding values, some guiding pillars, so that we could really hold ourselves accountable, and also to have this intentional transformative approach. We want to transform our food systems. That's what we want to do. We don't only want to improve practices on the farms. We want the policymakers to support those farms, and we want the technical assistants to also support those farms and have the necessary tools to do that. We want the universities to teach this approach, right? So we're seeking this deep transformation, and we thought about this quite a bit and ended up using or coming to these 3 guiding pillars. And the first one is what I just said, which is deep transformation. The second one is related to how do we do research, and we do it through knowledge co-creation, which is not an easy thing to do, is when you bring people with different knowledges together to bring something new out of that collaboration, you could say. I like to say that it's doing research with people for people. So I'm a professional researcher, but not everybody is. So how can I collaborate with farmers, with policymakers, with civil society people to do the research we need for this transformation? And the final pillar is centering equity. And that's a very important one for us. It touches on food sovereignty that Lilly touched on. And I think that if we don't have this value at the core of everything we do, we are bound to reproduce inequalities and oppression. So it's really important to all of our work, we come back and see if it's aligned with these 3 pillars. And it really helps us to stay accountable to our values. The Institute, it does a lot of different things. We do education. I'm going to show you one example of that in a minute. We do a lot of different research, and we are now working all over the world doing different kind of research, some more social, some more policy oriented, some more ecologically oriented. But we also put a lot of emphasis on narrative, and working with Lilly is part of our narrative work, is trying to share with a broader audience what agroecology is and why it has this potential to help us transform our food systems. We are also conveners. We have also do events, national, local, regional, and global. Every couple of years, we have a major event where we bring people together to share, to deepen collaboration. We are really convinced that collaboration and trust are needed in order to do this transformation. So convening has become a big part of what we do. And finally, influence, which is directed to mostly policymakers and political economy. And like I said, we have programming, local, regional in Vermont and New England. At the national level, we've just started doing some work in collaboration with IATP, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a minute. And finally, a lot of our work is global. I am originally from El Salvador. I do a lot of work in Latin America, but we also have collaborations and projects in Europe and in Africa and the United States. So a couple of examples from our work in New England. I have been working on agroforestry, on-farm agroforestry, through an agroecological approach using the 13 principles of agroecology in farms in Vermont, starting to expand to Maine, hopefully also working with University of New Hampshire and Cornell in the future. And this is an on-farm, more ecological type of work with farmers, and bringing agroforestry, a practice that is really well suited to New England that used to be covered in forests long ago. But we also have, on a more policy side, New England Food Systems Governance Project that brings together, you can see in this slide, one of our convenings, brings people from all over New England to discuss how to bring food sovereignty and agroecology into their work. At the national level, we have developed this network, or a net that works, with 10 other universities. So being an academic institute, we want to reach out to those other academic institutes in the US. And I will say that when we started this, we looked at, there are thousands of universities in the US. Not all of them had agroecology programs. So, we're trying to work together to expand that, and also to do research and learning programs and advocacy as a united front. And that's why we also invited two advocacy organizations, one being IATP and also the National Family Farm Coalition. And my last example of the things that we do is we just launched a new master's in agroecology that is fully online. We know that it's really hard for people to move around, and we also want to reach professionals and an international audience. And this is starting in the fall. And again, keeping in mind, trying to really share in a collaborative space what agroecology is and how it can be applied in different contexts all over the world. That is all I want to share about the Institute, Lily. I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you. I think it's time for some questions from the audience now.
Yeah, and I do see a couple of questions in the Q&A. And Celeste has a question, and that maybe ties into the programs you were talking about, Ernesto. How do we encourage more young people to enter the field of agriculture with the intent to pursue an agroecological approach, and what organizations and or government programs are positioned to subsidize their education?
That's a great question. I will say that the best way to get people to engage is to include them. And I will give you the example of the Latin American Scientific Society for Agroecology, where I serve on the board. We have representations from all of Latin America, including Brazil. And for a really long time, we really didn't have representation of youth. So we changed that, I'm going to say maybe 3 years ago. Our current president, Georgina Catacora Vargas, open up spaces in the board of directors for youth. So we need to do this everywhere. We need to open up space for the voices of young people to be part of the conversation and start giving them some power to work with us. And also we need to listen to them in terms of what is it that they need in order to stay in agriculture. One of the things that I've noticed working all over the world is that young people are leaving the countryside. They don't want to farm. This is something we hear in South America, in Europe, in the United States. And we have to work with them, but not try to offer solutions to young people, but actually have young people tell us what are the things that are going to work. So inclusion of young people is super important, and support of young people through funding, through opportunities, training. I think I would say that in the last 5 years, a lot of people in agroecology have really deepened this effort. 10 years ago, I wasn't seeing it. So I do think that we're trying. And I would say from the side of young people, you need to make your voices heard and reach out, because many of us are really wanting to work in collaboration with young people and give them the space to move this forward.
I also want to add that I'm sure they're not enough, but I think there are a lot of young people who are interested in getting into farming, and especially getting into agroecology and sustainable farming, but they don't have access to land. I feel like land access is something that I've heard again and again, that land prices are too high. And there hasn't been enough of a sort of land transition for farmers who are aging out of farming, and then young people who can't afford land. And that's true in the US and in a lot of other places as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, Lily. We have another question asking for clarification, actually. How's agroecology aligned with climate smart agriculture?
It's a great question. So agroecology, I would say that it's not 100% aligned. I have worked with people that are doing climate smart agriculture. It tends to be more open to industrialized practices. And I think in agroecology, we really are trying to avoid those and to try to find solutions that are not relying on external inputs, synthetic pesticides, synthetic fertilizers. Whereas what I've seen, and I'm not an expert in climate smart agriculture, is that there's a more opening to use some of those technologies. So I would say that there's an agroecological approach to climate change, including an emphasis on climate justice. And who is the climate change work benefiting that sometimes I don't see as much in climate smart.
Yeah, Lily, I was just going to ask you if you have some thoughts on that, because I know you've done a lot of digging into all the different terms and how
I've done some. I think I agree. It's another one where there's definitely overlap, and there are some climate smart practices that are also part of agroecology. I think, using cover crops even is like something that can be quite common. But climate smart as a term is something that can also be sort of easily co-opted and applied to a lot of these technical solutions like precision agriculture, or even methane digesters on factory farms. And so these things that we would not consider to be part of the solution. So I think that there are a lot of things that can be considered climate smart agriculture, and there definitely is overlap with agroecology there. But one of the things about agroecology is that it does have these sort of like intentions and principles built into it. And so with things like climate smart, it can be more easily co-opted and, like Ernesto said, applied to industrial agriculture, where it sort of locks in the existing system and reduces emissions by a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily get at the root problem. So it can be, some climate smart things can be good, some can be bad, and the term doesn't necessarily tell you as much as, it doesn't contain the same principles as agroecology.
Thanks for that, Lily. And I think we'll have time for one more question. So Delia, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is wondering if the current state and overview or study of the state of agroecology in the US is presented or discussed in the podcast. And this is maybe to you, Lily. Miguel mentioned that the net that works, but have specific recommendations been developed for the US based on this analysis? So first, maybe to the agroecology, what the content is of the podcast, and then maybe that reference about the net that works to you, Ernesto, and then we'll wrap it up.
No, there's not an overview of the state of agroecology. I don't have that information. I don't know if it exists. I think agroecology is happening in so many places in small and large ways, and I've talked to a lot of people in a lot of different places, but I don't have like a full survey of the state of agroecology. And Ernesto might know more, especially about what's going on in the US as they try to sort of create a network, but I don't have that information, and it's not in the podcast.
That is so the Agroecology Network is a very new project. We've started it about a year ago with these 11 academic organizations and 2 civil society organizations. We're going to have our first in-person meeting in June. We've had some Zoom meetings, 2 Zoom meetings over the past year. And this is part of what we're trying to do. What I will say is my perception is that the United States is an incredibly big country. When you look at universities, whereas the people that I interact with the most, there's quite a few individual professors and researchers and teachers across the United States that are working with agroecology. We have an organization called the Agroecological Action Research Collective that is, again, mostly individual. But I think what happens is that in such a big country, a lot of those things done by individuals or even organizations at the local level, at the country level, you don't really see them. So part of the effort that we're trying to do with the Net That Works is to bring up the visibility of doing research, all of us together. Like, here's research in agroecology from 11 regions of the United States all together. So people can say, oh, okay, now I'm seeing more critical mass, because I think that's what I don't see. And again, I used the European example before. You see in Europe these projects that are like, 8 countries working together in an agroecology project, 30 living labs across Europe being funded by the European Union to do agroecology. And that's what I think we haven't been able to do for good reason. Like, there's not a lot of funding for it. There's a lot of confusion still. And I think we need to work at all these different levels, right? We have to work in academia, but also in policy and through things like the podcast to just reach the general public so that more and more people understand what it means, that it's not like, I think Lily said, or maybe Claudia, that it's a hippie thing. 30 years ago when I started it, it really was that. I went to a very conventional ag school to do an agronomy degree in California. And it was kind of like, what are you talking about? Like, we're here to produce. And now it's come a long way, definitely, for sure. But I think in the US, especially because industrial agriculture is so strong, there's a lot of work to do. And there's a lot of work to do together as a collective in collaboration. And again, showing this critical mass across the country that might be there, but it's not using its collective voice and power yet.
Thank you, Ernesto. I think that's a perfect way to end this webinar. And thank you so much for your time and your comments, Ernesto. And thank you, Lily, for sharing your insights as well. And thank you, everybody, for coming. You will receive a follow-up email from me with a recording of this webinar. I will share the slides that Ernesto had as well. And we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar in June, where we actually talk about the Farm Bill and conservation programs and what the current status is of that. So thank you very much for joining us, and let us know if you have any additional questions when I do send the follow-up email to everybody. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.